The Fantasmagorium show is proud to present Money, Murder, and Minnesota, a retrospective and review of all things Fargo. Time to wrap up Season 4 and get the hell out of Kansas City. The award-winning Coen Brothers executive-produced and Noah Hawley-run FX series Fargo is what we are here for, so let's go. Kat is here, I am Scotty R37, and Steve went home because the war was over. How do you feel, Kat?
Glad that it's over. And started picking up a bit, but it's like, like a lot of critics said, it's a little too late to try and, it didn't really mesh together. Some things were surprising. I did gasp a couple times and like, oh shit, like that, which is pretty cool. But it's like usually Fargo does that for a lot of episodes throughout the season, and I only felt that in like the last 2 episodes. So
yeah, it feels, I don't know. I don't understand exactly what I witnessed. As I've been saying throughout the season, it's a great performance season. But at the end of the day, we got a lot of buildup that didn't amount to much, and the status quo seems to be exactly where we were when we began.
Yeah, and it doesn't even serve as a prequel for the origin of the Kansas City mob, which, as I mentioned in Season 2, is like a racially integrated, very corporate enterprise. It's not family at all. It didn't, except for the one post-credit scene, which is how I was talking all season, how I think I know what the connection is going to be. But we'll get to that later. But yeah, it's kind of, I agree with your sentiment. It's like a whole show that kind of sums up, in a sense, a big nothing. It's like, okay, you told a story, or you tried to tell several stories tied together that don't really relate very well.
Yeah, it seems like just a ball of string, and with no real purpose. At this point, having the entire story for Season 4 laid out in front of me, even if I squint, I cannot see the Fargo. Tenuous grasp at best with Mayflower and Loy Cannon's references to Fargo in terms of needing backup. But even that was just, okay, extra people that we don't know, and now they're gone again. Okay. Like, I don't know. The choice in the soundtrack, I love the period. I love the costumes. Again, the performances were great. But, yep, that was a gang war.
Yeah, and again, when you're trying to copy the same base plot of Season 2, which was also a mob war, you have to live up to a lot for how great that season was, and they just did not do it here at all. Shall I begin, I guess?
Well, before we do, I do want to say hello to, Lemon's here. Hey, Lemon. Aces. And so is the Phantom Organist.
Hello.
Hello, Phantom. And Lemon Pie points out that I've dressed up for the finale. When we started this adventure, I was excited because I figured... Ooh.
I sweater top for that. Because I still have my pajama bottoms on.
Oh, nice. I'm not wearing pants at all. But yeah, it's good to see you, Lemon. And I was excited that I would be able to wear a tie for this season because I thought it would be period appropriate, and never did. This is the only one. So here it is, everyone. Bask in my beauty. But yeah, let's get through it. These are bizarrely paced episodes because the first one's like 50 minutes and the second one is like 40. Almost like a coda. We just had to get someone carrying a bag of oranges, and that always works out well when you're dealing with a mob situation. So yeah, Kat, take us on the last 2 journeys.
So the episode begins with a montage of the mob war that's now going on between the Cannons and the Fadas, and we're seeing a bunch of people we don't know being killed, and the funeral home is being filled up with bodies nonstop, and New York is now pressuring the Fadas even further to end this. Like, right now, we need this done with. Otis, in another surprising turn, despite killing the Marshal last week, which seemed to be his making a pledge towards the Fadas, he then leads all the police in to arrest the Fadas at their main hideout, their saloon or whatever. I'm like, oh, this is kind of odd. And they never really explain what that discrepancy was about. It's like, What, you killed Duffy, and now you just turn your back on I don't know. So they all get arrested, but they do get bailed out pretty quickly. Otis is being congratulated at the station like he's the big hero, and the mayor's happy, and you see a newspaper headline saying the mayor's had it with the gang violence, and he's going to stuff it out, and Josto calls Otis, and it's like, why don't you come on back? What do you think's going to happen? Blah, blah, blah. And then Otis just finally has the courage to just hang up on him. He doesn't care. And Josto just gets really mad, banging the phone on the receiver, and surprisingly, Gaetano is the one who's advocating for being more level-headed, and they go out to see Ibal Volante, the main emissary, talking with that other guy from New York, and Josto still wants to kill everybody, and Gaetano, and again, a surprising character twist, is calm and not acting like the cartoonish psycho he's been all season long, and even he's advocating that, this isn't really good for business, there's too many of us dying, and we need to do this, and Josto's like, well, fine, but we need to get Otis, and, we need to take care of this, or whatever.
No one turns their back on us and lives.
Yeah. I guess I'll finish that bit up right now just for the hell of it. So
sure.
Josto and Gaetano go to stake out Otis's apartment, and Gaetano tells a story. Fill me in on what the story was, because I had a bit of a distraction at the time.
Gaetano tells a story of when he first fell in love with I guess a mobster's daughter. He was 11 years old and would follow this young Antonella and follow her home and would profess his love daily until one day she finally gave in, and they were kissing. They were kissing on the front porch of her house, and her father comes out and pushes him through a window, glasses everywhere, and he's strangling 11-year-old Gaetano, who Josto says is the same size as Gaetano was presently. And so, with the daughter saying, no, stop it, Gaetano picks up a piece of glass and stabs Groucho in the eye. And that is how that particular individual, who we'd never seen, lost his eye. And apparently there's much reverence that we're supposed to have, but that was Gaetano expressing himself in the face of love being taken away from him, at which point it looks like there is the final reconciliation, what will become the final reconciliation between Josto and Gaetano.
Yes, and that's when Josto mentions, after hearing the story, he's like, oh, that's why Papa sent you to Sardinia, to keep him safe or whatever. And he's like, yes, and then the war happened and blah, blah, blah. And so it's interesting that they have this kind of poignant moment. And then Otis arrives back at the apartment, and he goes inside and he's doing his little rituals, turning on the lights and stuff, and he sees that his apartment's been completely ransacked, and all the glass, like dolls or whatever, have been shattered, and he picks one up, and he's kind of trembling and nervous, and he walks out into the hallway, and you see the shadows as, the gunmen are coming. He runs out the back door, gets into his car, Gaetano gets out, he sees him coming with the gun, and Otis reaches for his own gun, but drops it in the back seat, and he's fumbling for it, but he also has to do his rituals and his OCD, and it becomes too much, and then finally he just kind of accepts it, and Gaetano shoots him several times, killing him. And strangely, Gaetano, isn't really cartoonish about this either. He kind of pauses and looks at him as he's dying and gives him like some interesting type of look. He's not like sneering, like, like, the Wario character he's been all season long.
Nice.
He turns and he starts walking back to the car. And I thought, they made a point of showing that Otis was still clinging to life, and I thought that Otis was going to get the gun and shoot him. And instead, in a gasping surprise, Gaetano trips, falls down, and the gun goes off, and he blows his own head off. And it's like,
yes.
Oh, shit. And it's like, and Josto gets out of the car. He's like, what the fuck? And he walks over there and looks at him, and then he throws up, and I just laughed because it's like, oh, God, Josto's just not cut out for this. And then he speeds off in the car. Meanwhile, back at the Cannon residence, they decide that they need help. And so Lloyd Cannon brings in his brother-in-law, Happy. And he doesn't really want to help. He's upset that he beat up, what's his name, Lenny, the guy from last week who had been in charge of taking care of Satchel. And, you're not supposed to take him out to the club, stuff like that. But then Lloyd's wife intervenes and says, you don't understand what's going on here, do you? They're going to kill us, and then they're going to come for you, because that's the type of thing that these Italians do. And then he kind of Happy just understands. He's like, okay, I got it. So then Happy and Lamine go to meet with the Italians, and they decide to make him a deal and say, if you kill Loy, we'll make you the new boss, and we could just end the war and it'll be fine. And he accepts, and he's like, great. So I can't remember the guy's name, but it's Loy's other number 2 guy who's kind of stepped up since Dr. Senator was killed. He tells him, hey, our 2 guys were over there with the Italians, and they were talking with them, and they're kind of suspicious that something's going down, and they're not sure what it is. Meanwhile, Ethelrida's mother tells her a story about the ghosts that we've been seeing all season long, every once in a while, kind of sporadically. She said it's the ghost of a slave owner named Thomas Roach, who's been following Zelmare, and for some reason, once they came to their funeral home, the ghost is now lingering around here and following us. And I'm like, what the heck? Like, I'm not really sure what that's supposed to mean, but okay. Could you figure that one out as to why?
I was having difficulty with it because now she tells the story because Ethelrida says, "Are we cursed?" And the mom says, "No, but we have a ghost that was the master of a slave ship, and your great-grandfather, when the sea was angry that day, my friends, strangled the life out of him. And your grandmother saw that, and the ghost has been following her, and so it sort of follows the family." I thought it was a very strange thing to introduce in the second to last episode, because there are, even with the last episode being called like American History or something along those lines.
Storiana Americana.
Yes. And I thought that would have been an interesting layering throughout, just if there is going to be the history of the United States coupled with the segregated racial communities, with the new world being as we move into the future. All the pieces are there. It's just, why do we have this slave ownership ghost being introduced in the second to last episode? Like, or at least his reason for being. Because I thought he was just funeral home ghost.
Right, he didn't look like he was, from the clothing he had, he didn't look like he was, 19th or 18th century or anything like that. And it was just some weird thing they mentioned, and it did remind me that, oh yeah, Zelmare's still out there somewhere, so we'll see her sometime. But so that happens, and then later that day, Ethel is out on the porch, and Loy's other son, who's been kind of hitting on her and flirting with her, is there, and they're talking, and Oretta comes across the street, and Ethel says, I have nothing to say to you, don't let her near me. And Oretta starts, and she's like, well, we should talk about this in my apartment upstairs. She's like, no, I'm not going anywhere. He's like, fine, I'll say it in front of him. And she's just gets really in her face, starts being racist and all that. And he basically tells her to step off, that you need to go home. And she's like, oh, there's a word for you, blah, blah, blah. She's like, I know what word you would call me, Oretta. And no, that's a word that you and people like you invented to make yourselves feel better. And Oretta just like all pissy about it and nothing that she could do. So she just leaves and goes back across the street. And I thought, okay, so now we've established that that's happening. Because again, Oretta knows that Ethel is the one who wrote the letter to Dr. Harvard, and so she's just kind of upset about it. But later that night, Oretta decides to sneak into the funeral home. We don't know how they didn't show how she got in, but she does.
It was very Evil Dead.
Yeah, the camera has this weird POV, and it feels kind of ghostly. And like, are we following the POV of the ghost? But then we go into the room, and we see that Oretta is in Ethelrida's room holding a syringe, probably cyanide or something. But then the ghost of Thomas Roach shows up behind her, and she sees it. And now it's like apparently now attached itself to her. And so she's petrified and she screams, but apparently nobody wakes up. She just leaves the house, runs back across the street to her apartment where the police are there. And she's like, well, what are you all doing here? Oh, Oretta, we want to talk to you. Oh, yeah, you're under arrest. And she's like, what? And she's like, yeah, he pulled through. And for a second, I'm like, wait. I'm like, oh, Dr. Harvard, because I forgot about him. So I put that together right before he says, yeah, Dr. Harvard, he's alive. And yeah, he remembers you. So she's like, no, I got to get my purse. No, you're coming with us. You're under arrest. She's like, help, police. Like, we are police. And so they cuff her and take her off to jail.
But I thought that was something that wasn't, we, as an audience, we didn't get that. Now, we did get Aretta reading the letter that Ethelreda had written, but we never got the moment where she found the journal or the book or whatever that would have made that connection between the two. And so it's all off screen. And so when Aretta confronts Ethelreda,
She did find it, because remember, that's how Aretta made the connection. She took the letter when she stole it from Dr. Harvard when she poisoned him, and she went back to her closet and she compared the handwriting with the notebook.
Right. Okay, then that's my mistake. I forgot about that.
Yeah, so that's how she figured that part out. But so she's arrested. Loy, meanwhile, is really sad because he misses his son and all that. And then meanwhile, we see his son, and it's kind of odd because it seems like this mob war's been going on for a considerable amount of time, and so I'm not sure how long it's taken, because I had to look it up, and Laurel, Kansas is in like the southwest corner of Kansas. So it's like a whole state away from Kansas City. So he's been walking home, I guess, and he's been stealing milk from porches and stuff and taking the dog with him. And these two hicks drive up in a pickup truck to kind of harass him. And at first he's just not even paying attention to them. And he's like, "What, you got shit in your ears, boy?" Blah, blah, blah. And then he looks at him and pulls a gun on him. And he's like, "I ain't a boy, and I ain't your bitch or anything like that. Blah, blah, blah. Get moving." And then they're kind of freaking out. It's like, oh, they don't want any trouble. And so he gestures with a gun for them to move. They start driving away, and he makes sure to train the gun on them so they don't try anything stupid. And he even told them that, "I'm the boss now." And I'm like, okay, this confirms for me what the season 2 connection is. It's like, I know where we're going with this.
Okay, cool.
So he continues walking down the street. And it did build a false expectation for what I thought was going to happen when he was going to get back to Kansas City, which I'll get to that. And that's kind of, we didn't talk about it all in order, but that's like all the content of the 10th episode.
Yeah.
The 11th episode, the season finale, begins with a montage of all the characters who've been killed over the season, scored to a Johnny Cash song. I'm like, okay, that's kind of nice. And we see that, Aretta's in jail, and Ethelreda decides to make her move, which is she wants to visit Loy, and she had told Loy's son that. He's like, why? He's like, I can get out from under his thumb, and so we don't have to be in debt to him anymore. You're not going to use this place as a front. Just, can you get me that? He's like, okay. So Ethelreda goes in for the meeting with Loy, and she sits down, and he's like, "They say you're someone I should talk to, and you have something to offer." And she's like, "Well, I think my parents have paid it back, because it was $3,500 plus interest. They've already worked up to $6,800 at interest of 10% that matches it, and plus they have the deed, and they're still paying the taxes on their house." And it's like, they stole from me. It's just like, yes, I understand that, but we returned the money. And he's like, "No, it doesn't work that way." And she doesn't seem to get it at first, and he's like, "What? Like, why are you here?" And she looks over and sees this painting, and she starts speaking in French. And he's like, "What'd you say?" And she says, "Oh yeah, it was painted by Renard, and when he was 26 years old, he was killed the following year." And it's I forget the name of it's the execution. I can't remember the name.
It's basically a depiction of a public execution.
Yeah,
and the reason that Loy has it is because it makes him look like a bad motherfucker.
Right, and he admits that, and she's like, "It's not the original." He's like, "Yeah, I know. I saw it in a magazine, and I had a cat who I know make it for me." And he's like, "So what? You're here to play the sympathy card because they send a girl?" And he's like, Ethel's like, "How many kids do you know, girls are bilingual, who know everything about art history and about accounting and all that kind of stuff?" And he's like, "Okay, but that still doesn't change that's not how this business works. You guys betrayed me, blah blah blah." And so then she offers him a ring. And he's like, "What's this?" And he says, "Well, I got this from Aretta May, the nurse that was arrested." And he's like, "Yeah, so?" And he's like, "I'm going to end this war for you." And he's like, "If you do that, I will give you anything you want." And then she hands him the piece of paper about Donatello and says, "This is Donatello Fada's ring. The nurse they arrested was his nurse, and she killed him. And she's been having fling with Josto and blah, blah, blah," which she probably knows from being housekeeper over there as well. And from the fact that he goes to her house right across the street from Ethelreda's. And so he finally gets the idea of what it is they're going to do. And so the plan, apparently, is we see Loy going to meet with Ebo Volante, the original emissary who would go and meet with Dr. Senator. Loy returns Zero. He decided not to kill Zero Fata after all. He returns the child, and we don't hear what he's saying to him, but he's got the ring and he's telling him. So then meanwhile we cut back to Dr. Harvard, who's been released from the hospital, and he's back in his hospital talking about his staff. Oh yes, the wolf in sheep's clothing, but I pulled through it, blah, blah, blah. And when he's leaving, I love it. Josto's just like, hey, bastard, bashes him on the head and throws him in the car, where we see his father-in-law, Josto's would-be father-in-law, tied up. Oh, I forgot to mention, that was a scene in the previous episode as well, when the would-be father-in-law showed up and was so upset about the mob war. He's like, the wedding's off, we're not doing this. And he started insulting him, using racist terms against Italians and all that type of stuff. Oh, you greasy wops and blah, blah, blah. And Gaetano was at the bar and heard that and came over, just sucker punched the guy. He's like, you can't punch me, I'm blah, blah, blah. He's like, and Josh was like, well, apparently we can. So apparently Josto hasn't forgiven him, because he's kidnapped him and tied him up, and he's got them both in the back of the car, and he drives them off to a field somewhere where he has massacred them with a Tommy gun and then set the car on fire with kerosene. And it's like, I like that. Okay, yeah, Dr. Harvard deserved it. But then Josto goes back home.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, he did. So Josto goes back home. By Fargo terms, he deserves it. So,
yeah.
So Josto goes back home, and he's, sitting behind his desk, and his buddy's waking him up saying, boss, it's over. Cannon's dead. The war is over. We won. And he's like, huh? And then we see that intercut with the guy who was going to, replace Loy, Lemmy or whatever his name was, walking up behind him, about to shoot him. But then Loy's new number 2 guy strangles him from behind, and then they also kill Happy, because they anticipated, because they watched him go in there and have the meeting with the Italians, so they knew that something was going on. So they've killed those 2, and Josto walks out front. And I was admittedly confused too, because like, what are they really gonna, like? That's it? They've killed Cannon, it's over. And so when he walks out downstairs into the main, the big, the pool room or whatever, you see all the Italians sitting behind Ebel, who's now sitting in the chair, and they have Aretta, whose bail was paid by somebody, and we didn't know who initially. It was paid by Ebel Volante. He brought her there, and Ebel basically accuses him of crimes against the family, saying, this woman, you conspired to murder your own father, and you killed your brother. Because we didn't hear what story Josto may have told them the truth about what happened to Gaetano, but apparently they didn't believe it, because it just sounded too stupid to be believed. And it's funny, because he's like, I didn't ask her to kill anybody. And she's like, well, we were having a fling, and you said you wanted him to end his suffering and for me to take care of him. And I thought the logical thing for Josto to say at that point would have been, well, yeah, like, take care of him, nurse him back to health. You're a nurse. And instead he doesn't say anything. He just admits that she's telling the truth insofar as that they said those things by saying, oh, well, we were high. And I'm like, oh, you dumbass. You just, like, how dumb are you? It's great. And so Ebel says, no, you've committed crimes against the family, and you conspired with her to do it. The police tell me she kills all of her patients. And maybe not, but we know she killed Donatello. And so they start taking Josto away. He's like, you can't do this. I'll have New York on you. He's like, New York knows. And then he gets really pissed off and starts throwing pool balls at him. But then he sends Aretta away, and even she's screaming. She's like, hey, wait just a minute, Josto, help. And they get driven to the far end of town, walked into a field where there's a grave, and Josto tries to make an appeal to the hitman. And he's like, come on, hasn't there been enough killing? And he's like, is that a serious question? He's like, oh, come on, look at what they make us do. All this kind of stuff, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, that's it. Do you have any final requests? And Aretta's like, yeah, can you shoot him first so I can watch? And he turns, he's like, Josto's like, what? And then bam! And I just burst out laughing because it was so funny. And then at that moment, Aretta sees the ghost again of Thomas Roach. And then the hitman kills her and throws her in the ditch to bury her. And I didn't, it's like, okay, I get that in the context of the story, that's like a big way of trying to bring an end to this war, the revelation that Aretta killed Donatello, and how Loy was smart enough to say, oh no, they conspired together, even though they really didn't. Mm-hmm. But it still felt a bit like Aretta's whole story was sort of off on the side and didn't amount to much of anything to me. It's like,
well, yeah, I'm
You're muted. We can't hear you. You're muted.
One of the parallel issues that are going on, that nothing really connects until it has to. Like she is released under Abel and admits everything, but why, even when confronted with the fact that she kills all of her patients, she's like, I'm sure I don't know what you're speaking about. So why would she be so forthcoming about having killed Donatello?
Yeah, it makes no sense. She could just say, okay, even if this ring is engraved or something and you recognize it, how do you know Lloyd's telling the truth? It's a mob war. She could just lie and say no. Now, I'm assuming that because the police understandably would have raided the rest of her apartment, they would have found all the stuff. And and I'm guessing that Ebel knows that and therefore knows there's some truth to what she's been doing. And I suspected that maybe Ebel was just telling Josto that, or telling for the sake of informing the rest of the family that we believe you did this, but that Ebel was smart enough to know that no, she's just a psychopath and did it on her own. But this is my opportunity to get rid of the dumbass who's been, fucking things up around here. And so I thought it was him making a power move, and that he was just lying to the rest of the family, saying Josto was, a willful collaborator, and that maybe he knew he wasn't. But you're right. It's like Areta just kind of acknowledges it, and it's like, you're in front of the Italian mob. They're gonna kill this guy now for conspiring to kill his father. And what, you think they're just gonna let you go, or because they paid your bail money? It's like, no, they're gonna kill you. They want the satisfaction of doing that. And she seemed too smart with everything. The few times she's been able to, weasel her way out of trouble to do something that stupid. And it just didn't really track with me. Why, like that? It's like, oh, it's the final episode and we have to get rid of this character. So here we go.
Yeah, it is. It is very much a matter of just tying up all the loose ends, and we even have one loose end that isn't really tied up at all with the rabbi, and like
we do.
He just goes away.
Well, he and Calamita and Omi were all killed in the tornado.
Oh, right, the tornado! I forgot about the tornado. Son of a bitch! I was hoping that Okay, I forgot because.
That's why what's his name leaves in the morning to begin to hike back, is all the destruction, because that's the one time, like you pointed out last week, that he didn't say, if I don't come back.
Yeah.
Because of that. Yeah. And so, they're dead. They did it in a fantasy way, admittedly, but yes, all three. I had to check. I double checked that on the spoiler summary on Wikipedia. And yes, all three of those, Rabbi, Calamita, and Omi were all killed in the tornado.
And this is part of the problem that you've been expressing, or at least now I'm seeing it, is that there have been so many characters and so many plot lines that trying to keep track of who's alive and who's dead and how they died, and like it was touching at the beginning, not touching, but it was interesting at the beginning of episode 11 just to go through the roster of all the people. And now that you mention it, yes, I forgot about the tornado, but all the people who had died through this costly conflict. But we're just gonna. Gaetano shoots himself in the head. There were people still in Otis's apartment.
Yeah, I guess they were there to hurt him out or to corner him in case he tried to leave, and then he managed to sneak out the back, and that's where they were waiting for him.
And they didn't come down to find Gaetano's body.
That's a good point. They didn't. You're right. They didn't address that either. He just.
Like, there's gunfire. It's not like...
Or maybe because Josto fled so quickly, they made a false assumption that, hey, did he make a power move here or something? Even though it's pretty obvious from looking at the body that, no, he shot himself. But, yeah, that's another thing. And then also the fact that they introduced Lloyd's brother-in-law and this other guy very late, like the second to last episode, making a power move with the Italians. It's like, why are we bringing this up now? And what is it that Happy necessarily... And they always walk around with the two portraits of like the grandparents or whatever. I'm like, this is kind of weird. Like, what does this have to do? Like, why are we bringing this up now? This is the time where Lloyd should be stepping up and being a more major player rather than stepping back and having these other new characters show up.
Well, and everything seems to be going in such a way that it looks like Loy is going to come out on top. And then finally, when there is a confrontation between Abel and Loy, Abel's like, well, what do you think? You're going to kill me? Well, you forgot about the guy behind me and the guy behind them. And it's just going to keep coming forever. And it was like, oh, okay.
That was a great scene when he goes in there to meet them. And because Abel says, now you're going to give me half of what we've already given you. And like half of your entire business. Like, that's not the deal. And I was surprised that Ebel's the one who screws him over, because he seems to be the one who's very level-headed and unhonorable throughout the whole season, at least from the Italian side of things. So for him to just do that and then make that power, because at first I was really excited that he was going to be the new Don. I'm like, okay, that he's earned it. And then he makes that Don move, and he's like, we have New York, we have Chicago, we have we're heading out west, we have Las Vegas. You are just here in Kansas City. You don't even have all of Kansas City. You're just literally one little family. I could wipe you out if I wanted to. New York just doesn't want us to do that anymore. And we own you now, and you're just going to have to accept that. And Loy realizes there's nothing he could do about it. And the day before, he and his wife and other kids got home, and he saw the front door open. So he goes inside, and he sees a bowl of cereal on the table with some little figurines lined up. He sees his son's hat on the nightstand. He goes upstairs. He sees his son's pants laid out, and he looks inside, and he sees Satchel sleeping on his bed. And he has this really great reunion where he embraces Satchel, and he embraces, and he's finally some type of human connection, emotional connection with him. And then he calls out to his wife, and she goes downstairs and has an emotional reunion with Satchel. And it's that was a really great scene, because you've seen that Loy has kind of understood the level of regret that he had for being such a dick by, trading his son for power. But then upon getting home from visiting Ibal Volante, or maybe a little time later, and by this time he did keep his word. He closed up shop at the funeral home, and they all left. And Ethelrita's parents are proud of her for having dealt with the problem. But he gets home, and we see that he's carrying the bag of oranges, and we know what that means. And he looks inside. He gets on the front porch. He looks inside the window, sees his happy family, and he smiles. He's satisfied. He's no longer bothered by the fact that he's given up his business. And then, in what I thought was pretty cheap, because, again, they're foreshadowing with the oranges, Zelmare just pops out of nowhere. Who knows where the fuck she's been for the last couple episodes. And it's been a few months, apparently, since this mob war was going on, because it's not like Satchel walked across Kansas in a day.
Right.
But Zelmare just randomly shows up and knifes Loy to death on the front porch. And Satchel, for some reason, steps out and sees her with a knife, and she motions, shh, and he doesn't do anything. It's the moment she turned her back to start walking down the stairs, I would have jumped her from behind and slammed her down those stairs. She would drop that knife in a second or impaled herself with it. She'd be done. But no, he just watches her leave. He doesn't say anything. He goes to his father and stays there as he dies. And then I guess he doesn't bother saying anything as Zelmare just disappears from the story. And it just seemed to be there for the sake of having, one, a Godfather reference, and two, because Zelmare was a loose end. But again, that's something where I felt that Zelmare and Swanee didn't really amount to much either, other than it's you got Ethelrita's family in trouble for stealing the money, but even that didn't really go anywhere. In a sense, it was like an empty threat. It's they've made the funeral home the front for their business, but nothing bad happens as a result of it. It's just, okay, there's the cannons are hanging out there now, so what? And then the thing with so then Swanee and Zelmare on the run is what caused Deafy to come to town and see what's going on. It's okay, so what? Deafy never did anything. And he got shot at the station. So what? And Otis, it means something if Otis betraying him. I wondered if there was going to be some revelation. Was there going to be a flashback that maybe Otis found out about something or whatever, and maybe that would be what the purpose of Zelmare and Swanee was in the end of the day. But no, it's just they're just characters who are just kind of superfluously there, and she just kind of superfluously shows up for a Godfather reference to kill Loy. And admittedly, Loy's been a bad guy. I mentioned before I couldn't really root for either family necessarily, but I like that he finally, right when he finally finds his family and gets back to it, it's that's it. And I'm I know another season which does something like that in Fargo, where the bad can be redeemed and then time to pay the piper out of the blue. But it felt to me like it was copying a different season. Not going to say which one. And that it was, again, there for the sake of a reference. It didn't feel like a satisfying ending for that story.
Well, Lemon Pie has a great reference to season 1. Oranges, year-round, like freaking kiwis. But, that is... yeah, I wasn't... As soon as I saw the oranges, I was okay, he's going to die. Because as we know, if anybody isn't in the know... In The Godfather, when Don Corleone gets shot, he is there getting oranges. And so orange has been a harbinger of negative things in gangster drama based on The Godfather. And so I knew he was going to die. And especially when he was content seeing his entire family reunited, I was like, so long, Chris Rock. Everybody hates Chris. And yeah, it just seemed like something that was going to wrap up. And hopefully, like as you mentioned, hoping that this was going to be some sort of prequel to season 2, or at least you get to see a little bit of the lore that was happening in those previous seasons. This just seems like here's what happened in Kansas City.
Yeah, because it's like, at the end of the day, the Cannons are now kind of owned by the Italians.
The Fadas. Yeah.
And I guess Cannon's son is not, neither of them seem like they're going to be big gangster guys. So now the Fadas kind of own them. But it's like, well, you didn't really have an Italian fan. It was like the mob, and it was a very different, very corporate. And maybe the idea is that because it was 1979, the mob's starting finally to go legitimate, and maybe that's why it feels corporate, even though they're doing all sorts of insane things in season 2. But again, it just felt like, okay, Evo Volante is not there in season 2, so he's kind of older in this season, and there's still a 29-year separation. But it still felt like, okay, so you told a story about the mob family, and you told a story about how the Cannons were supposed to be fleeing the Jim Crow South and making something of it, and they keep getting put down. And Ethelreda closes out the season by reading another history report about that idea. And it's like, okay, and how the immigrants are still fighting each other, but you would think, with that being the theme, the immigrants should be uniting against the oppressors rather than fighting themselves, that Aretta May have almost gotten away with it, because, as we said, she is like the whitest, most Fargo, her name is literally Mayflower.
Yeah.
Like, she should be, in a sense, she should be the villain or be the one they all turn against. And they sort of turn against her a bit, but it's like, well, they're still fighting each other. So it's almost like this season didn't satisfy its own themes, sort of. Yeah, and then we have the final scene, the only post-credit scene, or credit scene to my knowledge, in the Fargo show, or the only one, yeah, where we see Mike Milligan, having taken the name of Rabbi Milligan, now chief enforcer of the Kansas City mob, riding in the back of his car with one of the Kitchen Brother assassins, driving on his way to meet the Jesse Plemons character in Sioux Falls before something in season 2. And he's reminiscing about how when he walked down that road and he was his own boss and he was done taking orders from people. Even though, yeah, he's an enforcer now, but as an enforcer, he gets to go on the road and make his own, he's trusted to call the shots and do what he wants. And I guess that was his way of honoring Rabbi Milligan by taking his name. But we also don't know why exactly he took his name. It's like, okay, so why did you go from being called Cannon? Because the thing I was expecting was going to happen is he was going to get back to Kansas City and get mad at his dad. He's like, Dad, I nearly got murdered and all this shit, and you always said that this was going to stop soon, and it never did. And maybe he would have some resentment, and that's why he would abandon the name and pick Milligan. But he seemed kind of happy to be back with his dad and his family. So why is it that he's now grown up going by the name? I get why he would want to honor Milligan, but abandoning his family name and all that, it's like, I mean, it's kind of sad, because it's like, okay, I get now that the Italians now own the Cannons, and apparently that transmorphs into whatever that mob is in 1979, and it's almost like he shed his family in the same way that Rabbi Milligan did. But that would make sense, because that would only make sense if he had resentment towards his family, because Rabbi Milligan obviously did have resentment towards his family. That's why he sold him out to the Italians.
Yes.
But Satchel didn't have resentment. He kept asking his dad, hopefully throughout the season, will I come home soon, Dad? Will I come home? And all is forgiven when he got back. So the idea that he would shed his name and take the name of the one person, you get what I'm saying? Like, yeah, it makes sense.
I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense if you'd want to take Rabbi Milligan's name if you felt he was the only person who ever cared about you, but it didn't seem like that was the case. So why have you shed your father's name and now become Milligan and now working for the mob family that screwed him over and everything? Like, it just didn't. I was like, okay, and the reason why I wasn't sure if that was going to be the connection or not is because the actor who played Mike Milligan in season 2 was like 31 or 32. But given the timeline, the character would have to be like 41 or 42, and it didn't seem like Mike was that old. Like, it seemed very much like he was a younger guy, as you could tell through season 2. So I wasn't sure if Loy's son. It's like, are they going to say that, even though it doesn't really seem that way? But I guess they did say that. So that's the connection, the more overt connection, even though So it is what
Well,
it is.
and the way that Rabbi um, sort of turned on his family was because he was offered up in the offspring trade twice.
Ugh.
And that's why he was upset about it. But you're right. Like with Satchel wasn't like, yeah, he wasn't angry at his dad for doing the swap, although like he wasn't happy about it. Maybe something to do with the fact that the swap did absolutely nothing. Like that's the part that really bothers me. Aside from setting up the rabbi's character, this that was such an intriguing idea, having two warring families that would trade offspring so that an understanding could be met, and then it fizzled out. And yeah, Rabbi Milligan was the one who was protecting Satchel, and I can understand why he would like Satchel would eventually take the name, but he wouldn't certainly wouldn't abandon his father, especially having watched him die in front of him. Like, is it just because it was a fruitless venture? But then in which case, and I haven't seen season 2, why the hell would he get into the organized crime business? If he knew that there's no way that this world can be reconciled, why would we do anything about it?
Right.
Like,
And then, yeah, and it's like that didn't really track. And the whole, like the swapping of the sons, it's like it was working for like 30 years up until two things happened. Until Donatello died, and then Gaetano arrived. Because again,
yes.
Gaetano was just this cartoonish character. And like I said, he was like Wario through much of the season until he has a character turn out of nowhere in the last 2 episodes. And it's like, okay, so Gaetano's the one who sort of screws up all the peace that had been attained from the trading of the sons. And that's why you're right. It would make more sense logically and thematically for Satchel to be upset with his dad and saying it didn't amount to anything. And his father would be like, well, son, that wasn't my fault. It was Gaetano. He's the guy who came in and fucked everything up for us. But that's not really what happened. So it doesn't really track. And then again, like you mentioned earlier with Areta, it's like, okay, thematically, she is like your main villain in a way. She should have been more active in the show, if not pulling the strings to turn these people against each other for her own sadistic amusement or something, to fulfill Ethelrita's whole history report about how the immigrants shouldn't be fighting each other. They should be fighting the people who are screwing them over most of all. And yet, she just kind of petered out with nothing. Ethelrita, who was teased as almost like she was the intelligent person who's mostly you saw most of the first episode from her perspective, and then she just kind of disappeared into the sidelines and became a nobody. Zelmare just randomly showing up again just to kill Loy, and haha, I'm gone. And no, I just might as well say it. She doesn't show up in season 2 or 3. So,
right.
Well, she couldn't because that's way in the future. So, like, okay, so that's just a thing that happened.
Well, and Lemon does want to know. So, does season 4 tie into season 2 at all? Really?
I guess for an origin story for Mike Milligan, but was it really necessary to give him an origin story if it convolutes things and makes it nonsensical? I mean, it's not really. And I mean, I get that Kansas City's mob in season 2 is very much more corporate. You have Brad Garrett playing the lead representative for all their negotiations. And I guess it is still the mob, but it's not purely like this Italian. It's clearly not a family anymore. So in a sense, it's like, okay, so you told a story of how this is what the Kansas City crime used to be, and you talked about how the Italians ultimately subverted or subjugated the Cannon family under their wing. And apparently the relationship with Fargo that the Cannons forged was only good for that one shootout that killed Josto and Gaetano's mother, and that was it. So it's true. It doesn't feel like it tied into season 2 that much, because now there's still the gap of how do we go from this being still very much an Italian mafia family to being super corporate and racially integrated and everything by 1979, unless that's just how the mob history and the mob goes, maybe. But again, it wasn't a story you necessarily needed to tell. It's not like season 2 was leaving all these questions of, oh, where did this guy come from? How did this come about? It's like, no. And so is this a random story they told where it didn't feel like the ideas didn't coalesce? It just kind of, and I guess it's not as funny as the previous seasons. You have to look for the Fargo in it. So I could see, having now finally watched the whole thing for the first time, I know Holly felt the need to lean into the totally absurd and over the top for season 5.
Yeah. Well, but even with season 5 and season 1 have both been like, obviously season 1 leans heavily into the movie. Season 5, I think, does stay true to the themes of both the movie and season 1. Season 4 seems like it just doesn't. If you had called it anything else, I hate this, I hear this all the time about so many other things. If you had just changed the name of it and stayed away from Fargo, it would have been fine. It would have been a good as a miniseries on its own.
Yeah. And then another thing, like they keep leaning into
sure.
Storiana Americana about the history of America and all this crime and stuff. And I'm like, season 2 is a much better Storiana Americana than season 4. Because season 4 just feels hollow. Like, okay, it's really no deeper than Ethelrida's little history report at the beginning. And then the rest of it is just, stuff. Whereas season 2, all of the characters are representative of something going on in America in the 70s. And it's so 70s, the whole thing, in a good way, though. Whereas this just felt very hollow and kind of watered down. And like they had some characters on a dartboard and they decided, well, let's just put them all in here and we'll figure out how they mesh later. And then it just didn't.
Well, and when you do find out stuff about the different characters, like there's no reason for Deafy to have died.
Right. And it occurred to me today when I saw an ad that he was on a show called Justified.
Yes.
Where he's also playing a U.S. Marshal with a big cowboy hat and all that. I never watched that show because the time slots didn't work out when I was in school or anything like that. But have you seen it?
No, I haven't seen Justified.
Okay, so I was wondering maybe if that was the writer's way of subverting expectations, where we're going to cast him to play a character who's perhaps very similar in personality, who knows? Maybe not Mormon and with all those little flourishes, but another U.S. Marshal who's badass, who's going to do something, and then subvert the expectation by having him end up not doing anything. That might be what they were doing on like a meta fourth wall breaking level, but I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen the show, so I don't know. I don't know what their reasoning was, but you're right. It just didn't amount to anything. And it makes no sense that Otis would kill him just to try. Okay, so Lemon Pie has seen Justified. What do you think? Do you think that might be what be going on here? Because it's like, yeah, he's playing another U.S. Marshal, big cowboy hat and all that, and then he doesn't really get to be a badass here. He seems like he's going to do something bad, and he never really does. Like, he's watching all these shenanigans going on between the crime families, and the most he's able to do with it is threaten Loy Cannon to shut down his operation if he doesn't give him these 2 women. And it's like, really? If everything you've seen in the city and you're more worried about those 2 fugitives than you are about perhaps shutting down this mob operation or this massive criminal enterprise that's going on? It just didn't go anywhere. It didn't make sense.
In any of the other seasons, has there been like stunt casting that was, oh, we're going to do this? I suppose you could say that like having Chris Rock as the, crime family boss, that sort of goes against type, but I wouldn't call it stunt casting
because really good in that.
Yeah, he was, but like, and that's what I'm wondering about with Timothy Olifantastic is like, I was waiting.
No, I don't think there's ever been stunt casting except for Bruce Campbell playing Ronald Reagan in season 2.
But that fits because Bruce Campbell was in the movie Fargo.
He was?
Very briefly, when Peter Stormare is in the cabin watching the soap opera while there is a Bruce Campbell cameo, which goes back to the Coen brothers and Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi all being friends.
Okay, so that makes sense now. Okay, yeah, so then that's not stunt casting either. So yeah, there's never really been an instant of. Okay, so Lemon Pie says in Justified, Timothy Oliphant's character does a lot, and he is a badass. Yeah, here I did get the vibe that he was going to be a badass in Fargo. He was going to be a major player and have something to do with it, and then he never really does. It's like, okay, the 2 fugitives are what brings him to Kansas City, but he's going to get involved in everything else, and then he just doesn't. And then Otis just kills him for. I mean, I didn't feel like Deafy was being condescending to him. I thought his offer to Otis was sincere. That, hey, you want to come back on the side of the law? Let's do it. Let's be partners. Let's go for it. And he didn't like make fun of him for the rest of it. He was mocking him a bit for the OCD, but he was no longer doing that and had no problem with Otis not immediately following him to the train station because he understood what he was doing. He was dealing with his OCD. So I still don't. It doesn't track why Otis would have killed him. It's like
I was getting the sense from the reason that Otis killed him was so that he would no longer be under the shadow of either the Fadas, the Cannons, or someone else who knew that he had been on the take.
Okay.
But even then, like it's structurally with Otis, he is introduced as a character of derision because of his OCD. He is frowned upon by everybody who manipulates him. And then we're finally given a reason as to why he has his OCD, why he is so torn in many directions, is because of this tragic backstory of his fiancée being raped and murdered. And it's like, okay, maybe you are redeemable and you will pull out of this nosedive. Then he goes and he kills Deafy. And it's like, so I can't feel sympathy for you. Then when Gaetano kills him, I'm like, am I supposed to feel bad for this guy? It was like just one episode ago where we had a cold-blooded killer. Like, what am I supposed to feel, Noah? And I don't know.
Same with Zelmare. Once she just opens up on all the bystanders in the train station just to hit the couple cops, it's like, fuck you, lady. I don't care about you anymore. It's like you're just mowing down plenty of these, and not just a bunch of super rich white people or anything. There were plenty of other people, black people, everybody that she's killing in this train station. And it's like, okay, so it wasn't that you're merely, like she said, oh, we're outlaws. So I thought that, like she said, when my uncle I haven't been innocent since my uncle cornered me in the barn when I was 9 years old or whatever, however old she was. And so I thought maybe it was similar to the Cannons trying to flee the Jim Crow South, and she's just trying to get by in this world. And maybe that is how it started. But now you can see, no, she is a real psycho. And it's like,
well,
okay, maybe not real psycho, but she's clearly doesn't care about killing whoever she has to kill, who are bystanders to get in her way. And is a total hypocrite where, oh, I can kill random people in the train station if I want to. Oh, but God forbid if somebody turns against me or does something to me. And it's like, I don't really care about you either, lady. And
well, but she does mention to Loy that the reason she came back to shiv him was because of Swanee. And so it's like, all right, I guess.
Who was killed by Otis. It's like,
but under orders by Loy. I don't know how she would have known that.
No, Loy. That's right. Well, Loy, yeah, it's true. Well, Loy told him to have them arrested, or I guess it is Loy. But I don't know if she necessarily knew that. I think she just assumed that, well, Loy's the one who sent us here, so he must be the one who told them. She could put those two things together. But again, it's like, that's not a character I can root for anymore either. And they tried to give Loy a bit of a redeeming bit towards the end, and I kind of was coming more into his favor. But then when Ebel betrays Josto, I'm like, oh, okay, so Loy's not going to finish this himself. Ebel's going to finish it. And it seems like they're going to have peace finally, and then Ebel just kind of screws him over and says, you know, there's now a hierarchy in terms of the races and things and the way this all works out, which Ethel sort of sums up as well. Like Loy says with the painting, I thought it was badass, and I thought he got it because it looks cool, not because he understands the inherent meaning behind it. Whereas the Italians, it is a massive enterprise. Like, they're in everything, and so it's almost like that's kind of the difference between the two of them in a way. Like, the Italians became a massive enterprise because they know the business in, out, sideways, all over the place. Whereas Loy Cannon and his guys are just, yeah, they're trying to make a name for themselves, and they've carved out a little niche in Kansas City, but they're not big time. They're not going to go anywhere or become the next big thing, which is why they're getting pushed around a lot. Like when his credit card idea, which is another thing they tease in the first episode, that Loy's got his own bank apparently. And why did we not see more of that? And that doesn't really come back anywhere. It's just, so you have all these ideas that just don't really coalesce into a satisfying story.
Yeah, it does. A lot of it seems undermined by, as you mentioned before, just in terms of the breadth of characters and plot that we have to take care of. The interesting ideas, if it had been honed a little bit better, maybe they would have come through, because I think that there are a lot of good ideas that are there in terms of this segregation, the history of America, how things are moving forward, the influences. Like, it all seems like it's there. And then you got Orietta Mayflower being the agent of chaos that we want in a Fargo story. But law enforcement never steps up, really. There's no, the family doesn't, it seems like with Ethelrita's family, it seems off or strange, just in the way that because the dad from, like, I thought he was going to be like the William H. Macy character who got in too deep, and then it's like, no, I just own your business now. We're done with that plot line. It's like, I don't. I'm glad that we didn't finish here. I'm glad that we're going backwards from 5.
Yeah, plots that go nowhere. It's like they were more interested in theme than they were in story, and even then the themes don't really pay off that well. So it's like, and then they did that weird, Wizard of Oz, Alice in Wonderland episode for the sake of doing it, I guess. And it's like, okay, so that happened. Let's get back to the rest of the story.
Well, I'm fine with that
episode, but it has a purpose at least.
Well, and like, even with the movie season 1 and season 5, there is a little ray of hope or some sort of moral objectivism, being like, it's a beautiful day, and like these horrible things that are happening, they're up to you. I don't understand why you would do that for some money. Like, look around, everything's marvelous. And this one was just like, okay, the bad guys got punished, the good guys got punished. Sometimes the characters just completely acted out of character. It was all over the place. I want to say hello to Daniel's Hot Topics. Hey, Daniel. Never saw Fargo before. Spoilers. I'm sorry. And Go Away is here. Hey, Go Away. I saw the movie.
Nice.
It's a good movie. And just going back up to what Lemon Pie had said about my mistaken remembrances of Don Corleone. Didn't Don Corleone die of a heart attack? Not shot, but yes, he died while eating an orange. He gets shot when he's shopping for oranges in the city street, and then he dies when he eats the orange in
the garden years later. But you're right. It is many. You're right, though. It is a weird thing that's been misconstrued by pop culture, where usually when you see somebody holding the oranges in a mob movie, they'll actually kill them right then and there. Whereas in The Godfather, he survives the assassination and doesn't die till, you're right, many years later. With one of his grandkids who hadn't even been born yet, of a heart attack in the garden while he's playing with the kid with the oranges, pretending to be a monster or whatever. But yeah, but that is kind of neat how that kind of transmorphs into something else. Like, it went from almost sort of like the Mandela effect. Oh, he was shopping for oranges and he got killed. No, he didn't get killed. He survived. But that's sort of how pop culture has interpreted it with all the different homages and other films and stuff over the years.
Yeah. Edge of Time is here. Hail, Edge of Time. Greetings from the Edge of Time, where we can see the sepia. Delightful. And Go Away says, take the cannoli. I should go back and rewatch The Godfather. At least the first one.
I just went with my dad last Thursday to see Godfather 2 in theaters. It was great.
Oh, nice. Well, and really?
Yeah, it was a one-time thing because it's the 50th anniversary this year. Officially in December will be the 50th anniversary. So they got 10 months, but they brought it out this week for 2 days. I'm like, yeah, let's go.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts on season 4? Or do you just want to get the hell out of Kansas City?
I agree that it's a good thing we didn't end with this season. Granted, we know there will be more seasons. Season 5 was more acclaimed than season 4, and the ratings were good, so they will bring the show back. Like he says, he's got stories he wants to tell set in the 60s and the 80s and the 90s. Like, okay, good, let's go for it. So, but don't rush it. Take their time. Granted, they took their time on season 4 as well. There was a over 3 years passed between the end of season 3 and the start of season 4, yet we still got this. So it's like, I don't know what happened there or what went wrong, but hopefully they do a better job next time, and I'm glad we didn't end with this. But yeah, there's not really much else to say that hasn't been said. You're right. It was a performance season. Memorable characters. Yeah, Josto, because he's playing like a comic, like totally, floppy about, like, okay. And then Chris Rock in a more dramatic role. And even though Glenn Turman didn't last long as Dr. Senator, only less than half the season, he was still, I thought, a memorable character.
Yeah.
And Jesse Buckley, sure, as Loretta. But the problem is even characters who have good performances become less memorable when you don't have good stories to back it up. So, and I don't picture myself rewatching this season, to be honest. Like maybe one-off scenes or something, but it, yeah.
Oh, I'll probably check out the Wizard of Oz one again because
Yeah, that's a
I
good one.
did, but for the stylism of it, but there is, or the style. I don't even know if stylism is a word, but it is now coined.
All
Stamp.
words are made up.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I don't. I probably won't revisit this. I'll probably take a look through the season soundtrack because I like that style of music, that old timey music.
Yeah.
But aside from that, no, I don't. I don't feel disappointed having watched it because I'm still fortunate enough to have a couple of good seasons coming up, and I'm really excited for both of those.
And we will return next week with season 3 because we're going to save season 2 is better than season 3, so we're going to save that. But season 3 is definitely much better than season 4, and it gets back, and it's not as over the top absurd as season 5, so it's got a more even. It's a good season. I mean, I admit that when I first watched season 3, I didn't like it as much, but then it's steadily becoming one of my favorite seasons of the show. Save for the color grading, but because I find it to be too noticeable, which is never good when you start noticing color grade way too much. But but I can't wait. We're gonna have so much fun, and we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna do 2 episodes. It's only 10 episodes, so we're gonna do 2 episodes a week. So we will be back next week. Or if you're watching this on replay sometime down the line, it might already be finished in the playlist. You can just
exactly. But yeah, I am looking forward to that. 2 Ewan McGregors and Mary Elizabeth Winstead. Looking forward to it. Lemon has some advice for Daniel. Says the TV series is worth watching. Try season 1 on for side. Absolutely. And Lemon Pie says didn't love season 3, but I'll be interested in your coverage. I'm going into these brand spanking new each season. Kat, you've seen everything else, but it is always fun.
Yeah, the only ones I hadn't seen were 5 and 4. So. We'll be going back to the sort of recap format we did for season 1, where I know everything that's going to happen, so I'll be careful of what I say. But it'll be fun. It'll still be great.
That'll be me demanding no spoilers, even though what we do is get together every week and spoil it. So, and Go Away says Dune Part 2 is way too washed out, color grading wise.
Yeah, I've never, because that's the thing. Color grading works if it's like, for instance, I remember. Lord of the Rings of all things. Like when you go to Lorien, there's a lot of color grading to give it this almost midnight blue, but it matched all the lights in there. And so it kind of felt natural and you accept it. And they changed the color timing for the 4K, which I hated. Or when they go to Amenhen, there's a slight hint of a green tinge of color grading, but it's just a tinge. And it accentuates it in a way that doesn't feel artificial. But sometimes people are not as good at it. They just go overboard and washing things out or saturating it or whatever they do. And season 3, you'll be able to tell from the colors, a lot of browns, burgundies, and stuff like that, where it feels like the whole thing is kind of like you see how vibrant season 1 looked, and even how vibrant season 5 looked. And season 4 was a little noticeably a little bit, but season 3 I got it was more noticeable. But yeah, color grading is one of my nitpicks. That's, like, well, ever since that got invented, sometimes people just do it way too much and it goes over the top.
Well, and again, it could be a stylistic choice, and sometimes it works. But and when it does come to color grading and transfers from different movies and whatnot, go check out friend of the channel, Twin Flicks. He's doing 4K remasters and upgrades compared to the Blu-rays, and he really gets into it. So I would recommend that. I do want to thank the Academy. Lemon Pie for being here. Phantom Organist for being here. I hope you're feeling better, sir. Go Away for being here, which is fun to say. Daniel's Hot Topics, Edge of Time, and I think that. And where does season 3 take place?
In St. Cloud, Eden Prairie, and Eden Valley, Minnesota.
So we get to go back to Minnesota for our Fargo show, Kat.
Yes, we do.
Perfect. Well, then, until next week, I guess we'll see you next Thursday at 10 o'clock.
Oh, you betcha, yeah.